The surreal dreamscape is the final conclusion most people come to when they watch the movie Mulholland Drive, made by David Lynch. This surrealist film noir masterpiece treads a well-worn path of Hollywood dysfunctionality that we've seen in the past with films such as LA Confidential and Sunset Boulevard. The dark side of Hollywood is in many ways the shadow of everything wrong with America, but at the same time too, it presents and holds up a mirror to Hollywood, not just as an entity within itself, Tinseltown beneath the Hollywood sign on top of the hill, but also a mirror to the individuals that are drawn to it, the reasons why it's successful and why it goes wrong. In many ways, Hollywood can be seen as a borderline dysfunctional entity, full of dissociation, highs and lows, and self-destruction. This is, after all, the Hollywood of Anton LaVey. And in many ways, this is reflected within the movie Mulholland Drive, which itself is an extravaganza of dissociation, nightmares, visions, prophecies, remorse, encapsulated within the macrocosm of Hollywood, reflected inside the microcosm of the main character. The two main characters within the plot, Betty and Rita, can be seen not just as the fantasy world view or benign resolution of a pathological female, but also as a reflection of the dissociated dysfunctionality inherent within many modern individuals within this society. A proactive pathological infantilism to come to terms with the ending of relationships, the failure of one's dreams, and the inability to move on from addictions either towards the concept of success or the concept of the perfect relationship. Betty turns out to be a failed actress by the name of Diane Selwyn, who arrived in Hollywood from mundane Ontario in the belief that she could emulate the success that she had within her own limited community, within the wider psychological and cultural landscape of what is Hollywood. That in some essence her dream of success, brought about by winning a vintage dance competition within her hometown, could be somehow scaled up towards achieving the same level of success within Hollywood. And this is the symbolism of the elderly couple who guide her from the airplane and the airport to the taxi rank to leave her on her own to face the Hollywood machine, and why they also appear at the end as almost hallucinatory goblins at the last moment of her life to remind her that what she was and what she wanted to be could not be scaled up. She embarked on a dissociative dysfunctionality within her own mind that eventually led her to hiring a hitman to murder the woman she was in love with. Her borderline rage being directed towards Rita, an impossibly beautiful brunette actress, in reality called Camilla, who, after having embarked upon a lesbian romantic affair with her, left Diane for a director and went on to enjoy Hollywood stardom and everything that goes with it, while Diane Selwyn fell deeper into despondency and further into her own borderline personality. When Diane wakes up from her dream and comes to terms with the fact that Betty and Rita were fictional resolutions of her desires and failed dreams, and upon viewing the blue key in front of her, which the hitman left as his calling card for having staged the death of Carmilla, in the classic David Lynch manner, the story revolves around the miasma and grey area that fluxes between reality and dreams, and that the issues, problems and challenges found in everyday waking life are conveyed to us within a psychedelic unbridled purity of dreams and nightmares. Though the plotline seems confused, and in essence the story within Mulholland Drive is the reverse of what actually happened within the timeline of events. This also reflects not only the strange space-time experience of being in a dream, where several hours can appear within a split second, or vice versa, but also, having studied and looked into the borderline condition that affects such women, during their moments of borderline rage and seeking revenge against the individuals who did the worst thing that you could ever do to a borderline and leave them, they often describe that they lose their memory. They find themselves in a strange space-time psychedelic state where reality and fantasy and reality are chewed up in a cement mixer of psychic hysteria and psychological meltdown. And this is beautifully conveyed within Mulholland Drive. Diane's borderline personality is the glue which cements the entire movie as one piece of work. The dreams which manifest in the sleeping world of the borderline and within the minds of the non-disordered person are ultimately the truth of who we are, as the subconscious mind is unfiltered by the necessities of maintaining the persona which we need in everyday life. Diane's inability to reconcile the ending of her relationship with Camilla leads her into a distorted fantasy world, which many borderlines experience. In one moment, she wants to tell her how much she loves her. In the second moment, she wants to have her murdered. This is a classic borderline state. So in order to compensate for the fact that she's hired a hitman to kill Camilla, instead, Diane dissolves into a dream world where both characters are replaced by the fictional Betty and Rita, as fantasy is far more palatable than the appalling reality which she has both unleashed and experienced, as well as bequeathed upon others. Diane takes the name Betty from the name tag of a waitress at a restaurant where she arranges the hit with a low-level psychopathic hitman to murder Camilla. The Jungian aspects of the collective unconscious are also reflected in the fact that at the same table in an earlier part of the movie, an individual suffering from nightmares and visions knows that something terrible has happened in this place where they're now sitting. That's a key to his nightmares. Upon walking outside, he comes to confrontation with an almost demonic-looking homeless person, and this demonic-looking homeless person represents the wickedness and the trajectory of Diane's approaching the hitman to kill Camilla. The homeless person could almost be seen as in the context of the element of guilt, both the personal guilt of Diane and the collective guilt of Hollywood, which puts such individuals into position where they would do appalling things in order to get fame and love. Within Mulholland Drive, one of the most intriguing and puzzling characters is the character known as the cowboy. The cowboy appears to Camilla's director's husband, warning him to do the right thing in life. This is directly from her dream. And also, at the moment of her death, as well as at the party where Camilla flirts and tortures, almost sadistically, Diane in front of her soon husband-to-be director, as well as a flirtatious lesbian encounter with another blonde female. Within the context of the dream, the cowboy had announced that if you see him 3 times, you've done the wrong thing. The director does not see the cowboy 3 times. Diane does. And this is very similar to the concept of the Norns, or the weavers of fate within the Nordic mythology. Goddesses of fate and death are universally seen in the case of 3. And the cowboy reminds Diane that her fate is sealed. By seeing him 3 times, she has not come clean about facing her own shadow. Rather, her borderline personality has put her into a world of lies and fantasies and wickedness in order to maintain the dissociation she has reinvented as Betty and Rita. Because David Lynch divided the movie into two parts, it is understandable why the viewer would want to fall within the beautiful dream world of Betty and Rita, rather than have accept that Diane is not Betty, the innocent, successful girl from Ontario in love with an impossibly beautiful goddess named Camilla, and when she is in fact a dysfunctional wreck dealing with the aftermath of a failed relationship. Typical borderlines will only really get Diane's view. During the breakup scene, Camilla is naked on a couch, and the suggestion is that they both just made love. As Diane returns to her, Camilla, we are told, abruptly breaks up with her, sending Diane into the classic borderline, unhinged psychic confusion, where reality and fantasy are no longer applicable as mutually exclusive concepts. We don't know the real circumstances of the breakup. What's interesting is that during the scene when they're about to make love, we see that Diane is on top and she is assuming the male role within the relationship. Again, there are theories pertaining to the borderline disorder, that is a disrupted anima and animus complex, where the male and female aspects of the personality are confused and twisted and one crosses over into the other. Which is why the resolution of the dream is so important, because what David Lynch is telling us is that our dream world is often more profound and honest than our everyday life of existing as a persona within society, and in particular within the extreme society that is Hollywood. Betty is in fact Diane's ideal version of herself. It's how she wishes to see herself and how she fantasizes of herself being. A successful actress within Hollywood involved in a relationship with the beautiful Camilla, who now within the fantasy world she has renamed as Rita. Rita is the perfect lover. She's sensitive, she's beautiful, she's caring, and she has many of the innocent aspects of Betty's personality contained within her. In reality, the real-life Camilla is a brazen Hollywood siren who knows she's a goddess and uses it to her advantage. And this is ultimately why Diane Selwyn couldn't hold on to Camilla. Camilla was quite simply out of Diane's league. The underlying story within the greater cultural narrative of Mulholland Drive is that everyone in Hollywood is a fake to some degree, who's had to reinvent themselves, either as someone who is a great writer, director, producer, or star, in order to fit into those roles. Yet none of these people are actually who they were to begin with. The initiation is almost like that into a sacred order. In order to join the Hollywood club, you must destroy who you once were in order to become what you need to be in order to be a success within Hollywood. However, this destruction of who you were is a double-edged sword, because it comes with the destruction of the fakeness and the phoniness of who you were, as well as the virtues and the goodness of who you were. And who you become within Hollywood is the lie that begins the unraveling of your psychic integration. So therefore, Betty is the ideal Hollywood of Tinseltown, starlets, success, and the red carpet, where Diane is the shadow of Hollywood, failure, despondency, jealousy, envy, and vindictiveness. It's almost as if within Mulholland Drive, David Lynch has added an extra chapter, in a fictional sense, to Kenneth Anger's Hollywood Babylon. Another sordid story of failure and tragedy and horror within the shadow of the Hollywood hills. The borderline dysfunctionality of Diane Selwyn and the collapse of her psychic integration, although being told within the context of a Hollywood story, can be applied to every aspect of our lives. that we have nightmares for a reason, that we have remorse for a reason, that we have rumination for a reason. Whereas a normal person might recover from these, the borderline mind refuses to accept the reality of the situation and embarks upon destroying the individual or individuals who failed to validate the borderline mind self-adoring elements of their own personality. Upon watching Mulholland Drive, one is reminded of the inscription leading to the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, which reads simply, "Know thyself." And that's what Mulholland Drive represents. Diane Selwyn knowing herself but refusing to accept it, and rather than embark upon coming to terms with her romantic, artistic and career failures, she tumbles into a world of dissociative fantasy, which leads to a roller coaster of degradation and destruction and eventually murder, when in reality none of this should have ever happened in the first place. The impossible dream became the inescapable nightmare.